I now declare this 8th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in order. Colleagues, as per our previous decision, today we are formally receiving from the House the Fall 2013 report of the Auditor General of Canada. And so before I begin that, if I may just mention that we have officials here from Ghana and Tanzania who are on a 10-month attachment to the Office of the Auditor General under its International Fellowship Program, and we also have an official from the Australian National Audit Office on a 1-month secondment to the OAG. On behalf of all colleagues, I extend a welcome to all our guests and hope you enjoy your time with us here today and here in Canada. Welcome. I think it's worth noting, colleagues, that Canada and public accounts and the Office of the Auditor General continue to receive a fair bit of attention, particularly from many emerging democracies as they're looking to set up their Auditor General system and the public accounts piece of it that goes with it. We have been internationally, we've been to Burma and Jamaica, working with those countries, but we've also been receiving a lot of international delegates, and I think that will continue as long as we continue to provide as close to the gold standard in terms of the work of the Auditor General and its partnership with the Public Accounts Committee of Canada. We will continue to be seen as a model of public accounts and accountability and transparency. We're not perfect by any means. We're still pursuing and struggling and trying to get better and better, but make no mistake, there's an awful lot of countries that are looking at the office and at this committee and saying that's where we want to get to. We want to get to that level of transparency and accountability. So the work here goes beyond just the borders of our own country, colleagues. I would also just remind everyone that Monday we will be doing committee business, and that's the plan for there. So, unless there are any interventions, and I don't see any, then we'll proceed with the orders of the day. The process for the newer members of the committee is very similar to the informal meeting we held yesterday morning. I will turn the floor over to the Auditor General. He will read his opening statement, and then we will begin the rotation in the usual fashion. And we'll just continue until we've exhausted that speaker's list. So, with that, I will now formally turn the floor over to the Auditor General of Canada, Mr. Michael Ferguson. You, sir, now have the floor.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, I am pleased to present my Fall 2013 report, which was tabled in the House of Commons yesterday. I am accompanied by Assistant Auditors General Wendy Loschuk and Maurice Laplante, as well as by Principals Gordon Stock and John Affleck. This report touches on a range of long-standing issues that government has been struggling to address, with potentially significant impacts for Canadians. Rail safety is one such issue. 14 years ago, Transport Canada recognized the need to shift from an inspection-based oversight approach to one that integrates the oversight of safety management systems. This shift is ongoing. Much work remains to be done, and the transition is taking too long.
Only 26% of its planned audits of federal railways over a 3-year period. Most of these audits were narrowly focused and provided assurance on only a few aspects of railway safety management systems. The Department has yet to establish an audit approach that provides a minimum level of assurance that federal railways have implemented adequate and effective safety management systems for complying on a day-to-day basis with Canada's framework for rail safety. Our audit of Canada's food recall system showed that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency does a good job of managing most aspects of recalls. However, the weaknesses we saw in both follow-ups with industry and in large emergency recalls leave significant gaps in the system. While illnesses were contained in the recalls we examined, I'm not confident that the system will always yield similar results. The weaknesses we found in decision-making and follow-up stand in the way of the continuous improvement of a system intended to deal with food safety incidents in Canada.
In this report, we also looked at how the Canada Revenue Agency followed up on a list of possible Canadian residents with accounts in a European bank. The Canada Revenue Agency's initial work on offshore banking information shows promise. However, with more lists to look at, and changes in legislation that will give the agency access to more information, I believe that it needs to formalize its approach to deal with the increase in its workload.
Controls to prevent illegal entry into Canada. It's very important for the safety of Canadians that controls at the border work as they are supposed to. I'm very concerned that our audit found too many examples of controls not working. Though the Canada Border Services Agency has made significant progress in some of its efforts to detect high-risk travelers, it often does not get the information it needs to identify these travelers before they arrive in Canada. Furthermore, even when the agency has the information, we found that controls do not always work. We also found that the RCMP does not know the extent to which it is successful in intercepting people who enter the country illegally between ports of entry. Though it's not the first time we have raised these issues, border controls are still not working as they should. With better analysis of existing information and better monitoring, many of these issues can be fixed. Our audit of disaster assistance to agricultural producers is an example of a program with a disconnect between the program's objectives and its outcomes. Providing quick assistance to agricultural producers is a key goal of the Agri-Recovery Program. While Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has delivered assistance to producers for large disasters within their targeted timeline, those producers impacted by disasters with a smaller total payout often wait more than a year for financial help. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada needs to streamline its processes for similar initiatives, and it must track whether it's meeting its timelines. Passons maintenant à notre audit des services.
Moving to our audit of government services online, we found that since 2005, the government has not significantly expanded the services it offers online to its citizens. As Canadians rely more on the Internet in their day-to-day lives, they expect the government to provide them with online information and services that address their needs. The government has estimated that savings can be realized in providing better online services for Canadians, but there needs to be an overall client-focused strategy. Departments need to work together to make this happen. Our audit of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada's role in supporting emergency management on First Nations reserves. It showed that the department is in a cycle of reacting to emergencies. It has not been able to focus on what can be done to prevent and mitigate these events. Some reserves continue to be adversely affected in significant ways by repeated emergencies such as floods. These difficulties are compounded by the fact that the respective roles and responsibilities of the federal government and other stakeholders are unclear. Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada must work with other stakeholders, including First Nations, to reduce the human and financial costs of emergencies over the long term. We also followed up on our audit of internal controls over financial reporting. 8 years after government made it a priority to have in place effective internal controls over financial reporting, I am concerned that several large departments are still years away from knowing whether these controls are in place and working effectively. with annual spending of nearly $300 billion across government, effective internal controls are a necessary part of safeguarding public assets. It is imperative that departments get this work done without further delay.
Shipbuilding procurement strategy, specifically whether it has been designed and managed to help sustain Canadian shipbuilding capacity and capability over coming decades. It's still early, but so far the strategy has resulted in the transparent and efficient selection of 2 yards to build ships for the Navy and the Coast Guard. Though only a few contracts have been signed to date, and it will be a few years before any ships are delivered, the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy shows promise. As with anything new, there are risks involved, and these will need to be closely monitored on an ongoing basis. Il suffit de songer aux
A look over the audits that we are reporting today shows that in many cases the results need to be improved. Even when the government identifies a problem, it takes too long to develop and implement solutions. The resulting delays can have significant impacts on Canadians, both directly and indirectly.
Success factors that are proven to work. These include setting clear priorities, applying lessons learned, and monitoring deliverables against timelines and objectives. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening statement. Nous serions heureux de répondre.
We would be pleased to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Colleagues, we'll now begin questions and comments in the usual fashion, beginning with Mr. Albus. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank the Auditor General for being here today along with his staff. Obviously, this is a very important function to make sure that Canadians are getting value for money, and I certainly look forward to working with you on my time in this committee. I'd like to start with Chapter 1 of your report today, sir. Specifically, I just want to understand not just the recommendations, but also the problems that are at hand. First of all, it's my understanding that this Treasury Board policy on internal control was implemented back in 2009, and to me it sounds like the purpose was to shift the department's focus from audited financial statements to the requirement for mandatory annual public disclosure of their risk-based assessment of controls over financial reporting and their planned improvements. So it's moving from that. It sounds to me they're moving from just simply keeping the numbers, tracking the numbers, but also keeping an eye on other priorities that may have a financial, but also may have other things that need, like inventories, liabilities, etc. Could you just explain that a little bit more? What that shift is?
Well, certainly with internal control systems are important for many different reasons. They are there to help protect the government's assets. They're there to make sure that all of the revenue that the government is owed is collected and is recorded. They're there to make sure that expenses are authorized. So financial controls, internal controls are not just about producing statements. They are about many other things, such as protecting government assets.
Okay, thank you for that. And it says right here in your report, I'll quote paragraph 1.7, while the departments have made some progress towards completing their annual risk-based assessments, none of them have been fully assessed. Now, it was said earlier in the House today, and again, Mr. Chair, I'm bearing in mind that this particular committee really takes a nonpartisan approach. We're not about the policy per se, we're about value for money. But I was disappointed to hear that there was an illusion that all 7 departments had not made improvements, but it looks to me on 1.14, oh, pardon me, that's the wrong one. But it does sound to me that 2 particular departments, have made some significant progress. Is that accurate?
we found that two of the departments involved in this audit, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Department of Finance, have completed all of the work necessary to put in place their system of internal control, assess that system of internal control, determine if there are any gaps in it, address those gaps, and put in place a monitoring system. So certainly two of the departments we looked at had completed the work we expected them to have completed.
So any kind of assertion in this chapter, the states that the departments do not have controls over spending, that's not necessarily accurate. What we're talking about is transitioning from a system where they only monitored through statements to a higher level of accuracy and control. And I also believe that it has to do with accountability, as in the Comptroller General's overall position in helping guide departments to comply with the policy. I think that's another issue you've taken with the department. Is that correct?
Again, it's important for the departments to put in place these systems of controls, and I think that's been a priority for a while now, to make sure that there are good systems of controls in place. And certainly there is a role there for the Comptroller General's office as well, to encourage these departments to get the job done of getting the internal controls in place.
So because the policy itself didn't actually set deadlines, is it a fair characterization to say that your office, the Auditor General's office, and the Comptroller General's office have disagreed that with the notion that the Comptroller General, as part of the central agency oversight, would have a more of an active role trying to bring those departments into compliance? Is that correct?
Well, I think one of the things that we noted, and it's I think in the chart, the table that's in the chapter, was that there were at least two departments that told us that they were going to have this work done by the end of fiscal year ended March 31st, 2013. And what we found in this audit was there were three departments that told us that. Two of them didn't have it done. So that was a concern for us. And also, yes, we spent a lot of time discussing with the Comptroller General's office what their role is and what activities they take to encourage these departments to put their systems of internal controls in, assess them, and make sure they have monitoring processes in place.
So we are
fired, Mr. Albus. Thank you. Moving along to Mr. Allen. You now have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Auditor General and the Department for coming. Just sort of a quick question around Chapter 1. My friend across the way has been talking about that. But I think in your comments you actually stated that this is actually not a new audit of a similar situation, but an audit was done of this some time ago where the government committed to taking immediate responses and actually changing the way how they actually do this. Is that a fair summary of what the last one said? I don't have it in front of me today, obviously. I don't think you do either, Mr. Ferguson, but that seems to be what the gist of it was, that this was done before. Somehow it was going to get fixed, and it's still not fixed.
This audit was a follow-up audit of an audit that we had completed in 2011. And the reason that we came back and looked at it again so quickly in 2013 was that because some of the departments told us, in fact, that they were going to be finished in 2013. I think it's clear in the chapter that other than for the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Department of Finance, and I want to be clear that for those two departments we judged their performance to be satisfactory. For the other departments we looked at, as well as for the role of Treasury Board, we judged that the progress that had been made since the last time we did the audit was unsatisfactory.
And I guess I would use the term, and I'm actually to comment. You can comment if you like, of course, Mr. Ferguson. I always love you to comment. But it would seem the government made a commitment when you did the audit to complete something. You went back and checked because they said they would do it quickly. And what you found is, in this particular case, a couple of them managed to make it, and a whole pile of them didn't get there at all. I don't know if you want to comment on that. It's more of a comment from me, but I recognize that's not a direct question.
Well, again, I think the summary of the audit was that you know, it was a follow-up audit, and when we're doing a follow-up audit, what we are looking at is, you know, what departments have told us in the past and whether they've done what they said they were going to do. And then it's very clear in a follow-up audit, we look at what they've done and we judge it to be either satisfactory or unsatisfactory. And I think you know, how we our determination is very clear throughout the chapter.
And thank you for that. If I could switch now to Chapter 4, which is the food safety piece. And in you actually say in your report at Chapter 4, 4.57, you talk and reference the Weatherall report, which obviously during this audit process folks went through in your department and looked at, because it talked about what things they were supposed to do as far as the Weatherall report, which was, by the way, a individual who was hired by the Conservative government at the time, a lady by the name of Sheila Weatherall, who did a study in 2009 of the listeriosis crisis of 2008. I had just happened to be part of that subcommittee, listeriosis, not part of the Weatherall report. So it was two reports at once. Ms. Weatherall made a comprehensive number of recommendations, of which you kind of are talking about the one. Basically, it's the ICS, which is basically this emergency management sort of piece you talk about. What I can say to you, sir, is my understanding of this is, and I don't know that whether this became part of your documents, is the government actually said it had completed all of the Weatherall report's recommendations and when they were all complete. If that was true, then how could the ICS still be at a draft form, untested, from 2004?
We didn't do an audit specifically looking at you know, the government's response to the Weatherall report, or you know, so it wasn't. I guess, you know, to go back to the last chapter, we weren't following up on those recommendations and what the government said it was going to do. But certainly, when we were doing this audit, there were some components of what came out of the Weatherall report which were in the same areas that we were looking at, and in those areas we made comments about what we found, but we didn't go back and do a direct comparison to necessarily to what had been said in response to that report.
And fair enough. I wasn't sure. I didn't actually see that, but I wanted to find out if that was true. All I can say is, as the ag critic who said at the ag committee, the minister told me they were all complete, but you don't have the documentation in front of you, so it's unfair to put you in that particular spot. That's information I actually know.
Question, please.
But the piece I want to get to, the ICS piece, is especially around last fall's XL crisis, where it seems to me the left hand, if you will, didn't know what the right hand was doing when it came to the management of that crisis from a perspective of who was supposed to do what. Is that a fair summary in very layman's terms, if you will?
Well, I will ask Mr. Affleck to give us a bit more comment on it, but in general, I think, again, it's important to remember that in the XL situation, the number of illnesses were contained. We did find, though, that there was some confusion about roles and responsibilities and who was making decision. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it to Mr. Affleck if he's got more details.
If you could keep it tight, please.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The confusion surrounded basically two areas. When the ICS was created, it created new governance structures, so it wasn't clear to a number of people who was making the decisions and what the government mechanisms were in place. And secondly, the plan, the functional plan, was still in draft, and it wasn't communicated nor well understood by everybody in the agency.
Great, thank you. Time has expired. Over now to Mr. Hayes, who now has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to focus on the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy, which, to my knowledge, I think is the largest procurement in the history of the government, and it's extremely complex. And having read your report, I'm very satisfied that the audit shows that thus far it's working. I realize it's in the early stages, but I mean, some of the quotes that you mentioned, the selection of the shipyards was was successful and efficient. The government is working to acquire federal ships in a timely and affordable manner consistent with the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy. The selection process was carried out in an open and transparent manner. Public Works and Government Services Canada should consider using the NSPS approach in future procurements. The NSPS design was supported by analysis and should help sustain shipbuilding capacity, and on and on. So those comments are really good, and I could focus on those. You know, if I were partisan, all I would talk about is the good things. But there's a question around the budgets that I actually want to understand a little bit better, and specifically to budget caps. And, you know, with the Arctic offshore patrol ships, there was a quote that says, budget caps were set early and could result in a reduced number of ships or capabilities. And this brings up the whole philosophy, I guess, around budgets. And you also comment, you know, initial budgets were based on paramedic modeling. So my question is the process for setting the initial budgets, was it reasonable, the paramedic modeling process? And is it reasonable to assume that, considering the magnitude and duration of this project, that in all likelihood it's very possible and very realistic, and one would think that the budgets should change? So, you know, caps. Let's talk about that first, and then go on the other way. Should we be changing our process in terms of caps? I mean, caps were set actually before the National Procurement Shipbuilding Strategy, and one of the members, their office actually says they recommended that budgets not be capped until definition activities are sufficiently advanced to develop substantive cost estimates.
And I think you know, we didn't audit the estimates because you know, for exactly really the reasons that you were talking about. So we didn't go in to sort of say you know, were they established according to a reasonable methodology, because what they are is, as you said, they really are caps. And again, as you said, the office itself recommended that the budgets not be capped. So the way that we perceive those caps is essentially as a management tool to, I guess, make sure that there's necessary thinking going on in terms of number of ships, capability of ships, and that sort of thing. So we weren't treating it as a hard estimate, but what we've seen is, based on the information that exists today, particularly if you look at the surface combatants, the information indicates that the budget cap for surface combatants right now would result in fewer than 15 ships. So really what we were pointing out was that's the situation, that's what the departments are having to manage right now, and it's important that they make sure that all of the decision makers involved are aware of you know, those types of trade-offs when it becomes evident that some thinking is going to have to go into the choices, so that everybody's kept up to date on that process.
And with respect to that, I guess that's why your recommendation 3.66 was that National Defence and Public Works and Government Services, working with the Treasury Board, should ensure information to Treasury Board ministers includes updated information on changes to costs, capabilities, and schedules, and should request additional authorities as required. And the government's response to that, I won't read the whole thing, but they did state, as well, upon fidelity cost estimates for each project, once they're available, with a clear indication of capabilities to be required and the refined delivery schedule for ships. So they're saying, upon completion of the definition phase of each shipbuilding project, they intend on doing that. So I believe they're agreeing wholeheartedly with your recommendation, and this is logical that in the definition phase, that is when you would actually refine the costs. So are you in agreement with their agreement to your recommendation?
Well, certainly the department did agree with our recommendation, and I think it is important to recognize that we, you know, we started auditing this process very early, perhaps earlier than we would normally audit a process. There was, though, something for us to audit, which was the selection of the yard, so we were able to do that. So again, that's why we haven't audited some of the cost numbers, was because we recognized that it's still too early to treat those as real estimates of what it's going to cost to build the ships. But we thought it was important that parliamentarians understand that there are budget caps. Those budget caps seem to be you know, a budget tool to maybe put some discipline into the system, but people need to be aware that choices are likely to have to be made, and Treasury Board, you know, we just want to make sure that the departments keep the Treasury Board ministers up to date whenever they are faced with having to consider those types of choices.
Sure.
All right, time's expired.
Yes, thank you.
Very good. And now over to Monsieur Giguère. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I would like to thank the Office of the Auditor General, the officials, and the Auditor General for being there. And my question is about rail safety. What we see throughout your report is that a number of the recommendations on railway safety have been implemented, but we don't have anything about the quality of these audits, and that is there are the recommendations to the Transport Department, Transport Canada, and did they deal with the controls that would automatically stop the train, the UDF? This is what everyone is calling for in order to reduce the number of accidents. But unfortunately, this is more important than all of the other things that people are asking for, but it has not been followed up. You've said that Transport Canada has problems with having the skills that they need, and are they up to date on these technological innovations with respect to rail safety? They have never implemented them. Is that why?
Ask Monsieur Laplante to respond.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a delicate question. The recommendations often come from information from quite a few sources. We've got the industry, the government department, and so on, and often these issues take a long time to resolve. But with respect to your particular question, this is not something that we actually audited. Thank you. Coming back to the skills of the people involved, you found that 40% of the people involved will be retiring within a year or two or three. And you have said that they clearly don't have the training that they need to make the decisions they have to make. And regarding the ethics, you can't actually ensure that the ethics codes have been followed in terms of relationships between the company and the Transport Canada officials and so on. Can you guarantee that when a railway company asks for an exemption, for example, to have one engineer instead of two, that the inspector who will have to deal with that respects is qualified to do so? And do we have guarantees that the ethical standards are met?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Par rapport à...
Well, there are two parts to that question. First of all, the training and then the ethics. Concerning training, we found in our report, and this is pointed out in paragraph, I'm just going to find it here. We indicated, well, I'll just go by memory, 2/3 of the inspectors and 1/3 of the managers had received the training under the legislation concerning railway safety and the safety emergency system. So we have recommended that the training, that Transport Canada ensure that the training is given for this. On the ethical question, this is something that we raised because we observed that most of the inspectors working for Transport Canada came from the railways themselves, came from industry. So this begged the question, when they do their work, do they have the necessary objectivity to do their work, to draw the right conclusions? And so we have recommended that the department look into this and make sure that they have the objectivity and so on. So the simple answer to my question is no, you cannot guarantee that the inspectors dealing with an exemption request, for example, having one engineer instead of two on a train, are actually qualified to deal with that issue when we cannot guarantee that ethical standards are met. Is that correct?
What we found was that there are weaknesses, again, in all aspects, really, of how Transport Canada has been overseeing the rail safety system. And in terms of the inspectors, there were weaknesses in the training, weaknesses in them knowing what what they need, whether they've got enough inspectors. So there were problems in all of that. I guess though the thing that I want to make sure is clear is that we wouldn't we're not trying to guarantee anything. What we're doing is we're looking at how does Transport Canada collect its information to understand whether the rail companies are operating safely, and we found that there were weaknesses in pretty much all aspects of that, including in terms of some of the training and competencies of the inspectors. So I just want to be clear that to really get an understanding of your question, it's really a question for the department, because we can't guarantee that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. Time has expired, Monsieur. Moving on to Mr. Carmichael. You have the floor, not the chair, the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I join my colleagues in welcoming you, Mr. Ferguson, and your officials today. I'm going to also focus on railway safety and the oversight factors there. In your report, you mentioned that Transport Canada has implemented a regulatory framework for rail transportation that functionally centers on safety management system, an elevated level of safety management, SMS, as you refer to in the audit, that's designed to identify, analyze, and respond to railway safety risks, and that it has made progress in working with federal railways to implement safety management systems. You note that the railway sector in particular has experienced unique difficulties with respect to the implementation of SMS. I wonder if you could speculate or speak to the reason for these difficulties and what the government and or the rail industry could do to facilitate the efficient and effective implementation of SMS. In a similar vein, are these difficulties applicable to both Class 1 and Class 2 railways, or are they unique to short-term, short-line operators specifically? I wonder if you could answer those specifically.
I don't have an answer to that specifically. I'll see in a second if Monsieur Laplante does. But I think in terms of what can the department do to make sure that these systems are in place, that's what the role of the department is to do audits of the safety management systems so that they are gathering enough information to understand whether those systems, whether they're in place, whether they're complete, whether they're functioning the way that they should be. In terms of your specific question, I don't know, Maurice, do you have?
We have not looked at whether the different size of rail companies may have different kind of difficulties to implement SMS. This question should be asked to the department. You will have an answer to that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ferguson, yesterday at Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, Transport Canada stated that SMS adds an additional layer of oversight, and there are those that speculate that it creates redundancy. There are those that speculate it's a good thing to have that extra layer, particularly in such an important industry. I wonder if you could clarify if you feel that SMS is a beneficial source of layering within the industry.
Mr. Chair, as is our norm, we don't comment on policy. You know, the putting in place the safety management systems is government policy. You know, that's what is required to be there. What we do is we just audit, you know, compliance and implementation of the policy. So you know, I'm not going to comment on the policy itself.
Very well, thank you. Now, this audit was completed on results through the end of 2012, as I understand, and we've had a lot of very visible tragedies in the rail safety industry this past year. So I'd like to just though focus on the time within your mandate, or this particular mandate, and my personal feeling is that one accident, one derailment is one accident or derailment too many, and I think we'd all agree on that. And within the audit, you examined whether Transport Canada had adequately overseen the management of rail safety risks by federal railways from in that period. The Transportation Safety Board reports that train accidents in Canada had declined by 10% and derailments by some 41% from the 5-year average. And I wonder if you could just comment on that. It seems like we're making progress, but I just wonder from your perspective if you would have a comment on those numbers.
Well, in the chapter, we included numbers over the last, I believe, over a 10-year period, I believe it was. You know, within that table, you can see the years when the number of accidents peaked. But I think, you know, I think we need to be careful about drawing conclusions from those numbers in terms of whether things are improving or not improving, because as you referred to, you know, when you look at an incident like Lac-Mégantic, you know, I think it's difficult to draw the conclusion that you know, just from looking at the raw numbers themselves. So, you know, again, what we were concerned about was when the department was assessing risks, there were some important risks that they weren't considering, and assessing risks is an important aspect to deciding what the department is going to audit. So again, you know, we were just concerned that there are a number of places that they need to improve what they're doing in their regulatory oversight of the safety management systems.
Mr. Carmichael, time has expired. Great, thank you. Over now to Mr. Sims. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, and I want to thank the office for coming in today, and Auditor General to you as well. It's finally nice to meet you. I want to talk about earlier some comments that were made about ship procurement, not that specifically, but we talked about options. In other words, this is a process that is noble, but nonetheless, because of the budget caps, options have to be made, and therefore these numbers have to be adjusted, so on and so forth. These are major decisions with major amounts of money, as we all know. What bothers me, I think, the most, alarms me the most, is, and I'll read directly from your Chapter 1. It says, 8 years after government made it a priority to have in place effective internal controls over financial reporting, I am concerned that several large departments are still years away, that's years away from knowing whether these effective internal controls are necessary part of the function. So what I'm saying is that I'm very alarmed at the monitoring that is not taking place. And specifically, since I'm the citizen service critic for the Liberal Party, I want to focus in on Chapter 2, access to online services. To give you some time to check that out. It says, since 2005, and that's quite a while ago, the government has not significantly expanded the services it offers online to its citizens. But for the last 5 or 6 years, we've constantly been hearing about how we're going to steer traffic, the clients, from in-person visits, telephone calls, over towards the online service. Now, I get that because the numbers that you show say that it costs the government close to $30 for a person-to-person visit into an office. But if you do it online, some of the studies show it can be cheap as 13 cents. But the problem is that it's just not keeping up with what expectations are. Both from the government says that they want more people online, but it seems to me they're just not ready for it. There's no coordination. And in one example, and I'll leave with this is 2.42 in Chapter 2 on online access. This is what's alarming. It says, Service Canada does not have an overall service delivery strategy, although it has been working on developing one since 2009. Millions of dollars spent on advising people to go online when it's not there. So what is most egregious to you over the past, since 2005, that deserves attention?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, in the question touched on 3 different chapters, really, and I think the link that can be drawn amongst many of the chapters in many of the audits that we did, and I said it in my opening statement, is that even though the departments are aware that there are these types of issues that need to be fixed, in many cases it's taking too long to develop solutions and too long to implement solutions. And I think that's a fairly common thread amongst a lot of the audits that we've presented. In terms of the online services themselves, people now do expect to be able to complete transactions online. They expect to be able to go online.
83% of the population prefers online.
So they expect to be able to go online. They expect to be able to interact with their government and complete their transactions with the government. But we've got a couple of examples in there, for businesses where interacting with one department, it takes them 5 days to get set up. With another department, it takes them 21 days to get set up. And that type of performance just doesn't seem to be what you would expect in an online world.
Yeah, and are we lacking here a central mechanism by which all these departments can cross-thread the information? You mentioned, it seems to me that the only service that really coordinates well with others, meaning not just the other departments but the province, would be newborns. When a child is born, they're registering the information. But everything else seems to be off the rails. We're all siloed as far as electronic information is concerned. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, again, and recognizing that that technology can be complex and it can be difficult sometimes to get different systems to talk to each other, but generally we feel that there does need to be a strategy. That there needs to be a strategy that gives direction to the departments about what's expected from them, how they're expected to work together. And just coordinate those types of activities, but it starts with having that overall strategy.
Yeah, I want a quick question.
Sorry, no, Mr. Simmons, sorry, time has expired, sir. Moving over now to Mr. Aspin. You now have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Mr. Ferguson and our guests. And I'd like to begin by complimenting you on your French. You're coming along quite nicely. As Canadians, we rely more and more on internet, more and more on online services. And, if you look across the breadth of our government, you look at such services as human resources development, Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, Veterans Affairs, Industry Canada, just to name a number of departments that are really client-based departments. So In your view, Mr. Ferguson, given the size and scope of online services right throughout the government, and particularly in those 4 departments, which federal department would you say is best to oversee and coordinate government-wide efforts?
Certainly, in terms of putting together the strategy, I believe, if my memory serves me, that we made that recommendation to Treasury Board to be the lead on making sure that a strategy is in place. I think in terms of the departments we looked at, the department that has made the most progress since 2005 in offering online services was the Canada Revenue Agency. So they've made the most progress since 2005, but I think the right place to have the responsibility for coordinating a strategy is really with the Treasury Board Secretariat.
Okay, and you made that point, as you formally did in response to Mr. Sims's question, that there should be a strategy, an overall strategy, but coordinated by one particular department, and you name that as Treasury Board.
That's right. Again, I think that's where it all starts, is with making sure that there is that overall strategy that gives direction to departments about what's expected of them.
Okay, and you noted that in your former comments that Canada Revenue Agency is doing some fair amount of good work in this area. So your report notes that in the last 4 years, Canada Revenue Agency has added over 40 online service enhancements. Could you possibly comment on these additions and what best practices exist here for other departments to look at or improve their online services for Canadians?
Well, I'll answer in a general sense and then see if Ms. Loschuk has anything to add. But I think the overall best practice that we've seen, or good practice that we've seen, is simply the fact that the agency has continued to make this file a priority. They've continued to make sure that they are putting in place services that Canadians can use online. But I'll see if Ms. Loschuk has anything else to add.
Thank you, Chair. What I would like to add is that with CRA, you were asking about best practices, and the advantage I think that they have is they're very client-focused. They are looking very much to understand what Canadians need to file their taxes and to work in my account, etc. So they have more of an outward look. What we saw with other departments is that they're a little more internal, and a lot of their work tends to be a bit more focused on what they do inside for their own business practices. Certainly with a more government-wide focus, as the Auditor General's pointed out, with some leadership from Treasury Board. As well, we mentioned in our recommendation, HRSDC through Shared Services Canada, that if there were more of a government-wide perspective on how departments can deal with this more of a client focus, that would help significantly.
Okay. Chair.
10 seconds, if you can think of something quick.
As an example of efficiency, your report notes that the enrollment process at Industry Canada to federally incorporate a business can be completed the same day. Are there any other such examples in this report that serve as best practices for other departments?
I'll ask Ms. Loschuk to address that.
Well, certainly we noticed that in some cases departments allow you to complete a transaction from start to finish, where if you want to get in and register, etc. In other cases, you have to wait for a password or some other information to come in the mail. So, very quickly, there are things that departments are doing where they look and see what does the customer need, and let's try to focus on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Aspen, very good. Thank you, sir. And now over to Mr. Harris, who now has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll be focusing on Chapter 6, Emergency Management on Reserves. But before I get to that, just to follow up on the online services, and as further proof about how important the work that your office does is, in 2.19, it states a 2010 Service Canada survey stated that 32%, that's 1/3 of Canadians who visited its in-person service centres, had previously used the telephone or online service delivery channels. So that means that 1/3 of people going to see services in person weren't able to complete what they needed to do online or by phone. I think that's certainly a glaring lack and certainly an area that the government and departments need to address to increase customer satisfaction. Another one that is frankly shocking in 2013 is in 2.21, again in reference to HRSDC. While these improvements have resulted in 98% of EI applications being filed online, which is exceptional, an individual still cannot determine the status of their claim online. That should be something pretty simple to fix. Would you not think?
I'm never going to try to venture, I guess, into the world of how easy it is to fix something in technology. However, you know, it was something that that we felt was notable. That you know, that the technology is there to file online, but you know, but not there to understand the status. So again, it was just an example of what you can and cannot do online.
I come from an IT and computers and customer service background, and it's never as easy as it looks, and we just have to look south of the border and the problems that they're having with online services right now as proof of that. Now moving over to the Emergency Management on Reserves, Chapter 6. I wanted to start off with a line from why it was important to do the audit. In Canada, natural disasters and catastrophic events such as flooding are increasing in both frequency and intensity. When it comes to such disasters, First Nations communities are considered to be at risk of emergencies due to their isolation and geographic location. Of course, it's not up to you to figure out why we're having more catastrophes and disasters, and I would say for myself that I believe climate change is a part of it. But from 2009-10 to 2012-13, there have been 447 emergencies that occurred on reserves. And moving to your findings, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada's annual budget of about $19 million for the Emergency Management Program is not sufficient. Later, you mentioned that the government had to put in close to $400 million in additional money into those programs over and above the $19 million that was put in. Later in the same paragraph, it's mentioned that oftentimes the money was borrowed from other funds, including the capital funds, which are there to actually build and to build infrastructure in these communities, which would make them safer and less prone to emergencies and disasters. Do you think that this is a prudent approach? I mean, you've mentioned it in the report, and it's something that is there. Is there enough money going into disaster management? Does the government have the right focus? Are they putting enough on prevention and mitigation of disasters to prevent them from happening in the first place?
In terms of the budget, we understand that you know, having a central pool for the department to draw on in emergency situations is probably makes sense as a way to manage contingency funding and emergency funding. What concerned us was the fact that we did see examples where the department had to draw from its own capital funding to deal with some of the emergency situations. And that capital funding would be there for, you know, to make capital improvements and that sort of thing. So to have to draw into that to deal with emergencies, that was the part that concerned us. We also identified that of the $448 million that was spent over that 4-year time period, only 1% of it, about $4 million, was spent on the prevention or mitigation activities. So the department very much is in a mode of having to respond and react to emergencies, and we feel that really they need to be able to put a bit more focus on prevention and mitigation activities.
So really you're saying
Time's expired.
there's never enough time. Thank you.
Never is. Thank you. Over to Mr. Woodworth. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I was going to say to Mr. Harris, since I've gotten involved in politics, I find that 5 minutes takes a lot longer when other people are speaking than when I'm speaking. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I welcome our guests today, and thank you for your attendance. I want to say at the outset, I'm always very impressed, Mr. Ferguson, by the degree of detail and thoroughness with which you bring to your reports in terms of tracking things down and crossing every T, dotting every I. I want to begin with an issue that I think was incorrectly stated earlier, and it arises, all of my questions, by the way, will be from Chapter 4, Canada's Food Recall System. 4.57 is the paragraph. As I understand it, the Weatherill report recommended, among other things, the use of the ICS. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Yes. And ICS stands for Incident Command System, correct?
That's correct.
And the ICS system was, in fact, activated during the XL Foods recall. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And in fact, you found that the activation of the ICS at the national level in relation to the XL food recall was effective in engaging CFIA senior management, correct?
Yes, that is correct. That was one of the original observations of the Weatherill report, was to engage senior management.
So it would not be correct to say that whatever else might be still in draft, it would not be correct to say that the ICS is in draft. It actually has been formulated and, in fact, applied. Is that correct?
Yes, it was applied. However, we noted that there was uncertainty and confusion.
Problems. Right.
Around roles and responsibilities. Yes.
If you don't mind, you'll find I ask pretty tight questions, and because of the time limitation that Mr. Harris and I were discussing, I'm going to try and keep your answers to my questions. So, and in fact, after the XL incident, the CFIA people learned from that and took steps to improve the ICS by, in fact, better integrating food safety specialists. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Now, what I want to really talk about are the things that I think are important to most Canadians when it comes to food recall. And first and foremost, I think that Canadians want to make sure that if there is any reasonable possibility of a problem, that the CFIA is on the job and will investigate it. I think that they don't want CFIA to leave any stone unturned. So can you tell me how many food safety investigations each year the CFIA undertakes?
It's roughly around 3,000.
3,000, and I would characterize that as a very vigilant system of investigations. Would you agree with that characterization?
I don't really have a relative benchmark to compare that to, but it is a large number.
All right. And I understand that during your audit, you examined 59 cases in which CFIA actually engaged in food recalls. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Am I right that in not one of those 59 recall cases, or rather, let me rephrase that, in every one of those 59 recall cases, you found that the illnesses involved were appropriately and reasonably contained?
Yes, that is correct.
Right, because I think that's also another hot issue with the Canadian public. They want to make sure that the recalls are effective in containing illnesses. In fact, there were other recalls that you didn't actually investigate during the 2-year period of your audit. Is that correct?
Well, our sample during that 2-year period of audit was randomly selected.
Right. So there were more than 59 recalls during the 2 years, correct?
Normally, on average, every year there's between 200 and 300 recalls, and our sample is 59.
And during the time you were conducting that audit, did any case come to your attention where a recall did not effectively and appropriately contain the foodborne illness involved?
No, the ones that we looked at were the 3 large meat recalls in 2012.
Well, but you examined 59 recalls, and there were 200 or 300 recalls occurring during the time of your 2-year audit, and during that entire 2 years, you didn't hear of a single case where the foodborne illness involved was not effectively contained. Is that correct?
I can't speak to the recalls outside of the 59 that we examined, but the ones we examined, yes, it was contained.
And I'm sure you would have told me if there were any others you heard about.
Mr. Woodworth, time has expired. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That relative 5 minutes you were speaking of has arrived. Now over to Mr. Sims. You have the floor again, sir.
Well, actually, I'm going to pick up where I left off, because one of the things earlier on the online services that was mentioned by Mr. Aspin, going for examples of how this worked, the other thing that I find alarming is that we're not coordinating and talking to the provinces, which carry out the bulk of social services when needed, whether it becomes, especially in the form of health care. Certainly, when it comes to benefits such as CPP and other issues like EI, and beyond that, from Service Canada, of course, it seems to be there should be a more coordinated approach. But again, you highlight only the area that talks about newborns. So is that a model that works but nobody else is using?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The area that we looked at, we tried to track life events and looked at how people do certain transactions to life events. Newborns came up because it was one where we have had success with the provinces. Other than that, from what we looked at, there wasn't a whole lot of connection. I have to say that in the chapter we focused on the federal side. We didn't go into the provinces at all to determine why there wasn't a bit more.
But certainly you could determine that there's just no connection there, no coordination there whatsoever, at least no central coordination. And I believe you said earlier, it's for several of the departments outside of the CRA, it was more of an internal measure, best business practice, I think was the term you used.
That's right.
But that's certainly not client-focused by any, I mean, you know, I want to put you in a position where you comment on policy, but nonetheless, it is certainly substandard to what is considered client-focused strategy. I want to ask this specific question. Did you come up with a number in your investigation where people who went to a government service in person started online and ended up going in person?
Well, I believe that in 2019 we talk about the survey that Service Canada did themselves. So there is that data from 2010. Right. But from 2010 onward, I don't believe that we had the exact figures to say how many people tried to start online and then ended up in a Service Canada kiosk or office trying to work with an individual. I don't believe that we tracked it exactly from going online to being there.
Okay. You mentioned in your report, sporadically, about the late 90s, it was the GOL, or the Government Online Service, which was initiated by the government of the day. Right. Things started to unravel, we'll say, in 2005. Post-2005, and what was it about the GOL service that was lost following 2005?
I think what we noted was the government online strategy, was put in place, and it identified 130 services to put online, and that was being tracked. That strategy ended, I believe that strategy ended in 2005. So they were tracking the 130 services, did an assessment at the end of that. So it was a specific program with specific objectives. It finished in 2005, and then after that, there was not another strategy that was put in place to determine what the objectives were going forward.
Yeah, because it seems, and then we go back to what you say in Chapter 1 about the monitoring issues have just seemed to severely lack, but it's going on for quite some time, where we need to really do a lot of catch-up on monitoring of these programs to find out if we're getting the measured success that we so desire. Certainly when it comes to procurement and shipbuilding or even other types of equipment of that size, right decision about options, it seems to me that it's prolific across many departments where we lack the amount of monitoring in order to make these decisions.
We mentioned, as I mentioned in my opening statement, again, a number of these issues have been around for a while. Departments have been working on them for a while. They haven't been able to get them resolved, and we think they need to go back to the things that have been proven to work in terms of setting deadlines, learning lessons, setting objectives, those types of things, and measuring performance to make sure that some of these files move forward.
We've heard of terms like Shared Services Canada, ways of improving access for the average citizen, primarily online, of course. But where has most of this gone if we don't have the right measures in place? In other words, what are the improvements that you would see since 2005 that are measurable? And I'm not talking about specific departments. I'm just talking about methods by which we communicate with citizens, or the term you use, which is client focus.
Well, that's what we were looking to find out, and really what we identified was the Canada Revenue Agency has made some progress in that area. We haven't sort of put an inventory of all of the programs where there might have been some progress, but again, that's why the strategy is important, to set out what's expected of the departments, what applications or what services can be delivered online, putting together that overall strategy so the departments know which applications to work on. I think that's the starting point.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Sims. Sorry, sir.
Thank you.
We are over, and actually well over. Now to Mr. Shipley. You have the floor, sir.
Same opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I want to just go to, and I'm going to focus on Chapter 8. Just in your opening statement, the audit of disaster assistance to agriculture producers is an example of a program with a disconnect between a program's objective and its outlined. I may be reading it wrong, but I would read that as this is not a program that anyone would want to template. So I want to go to page 4. By the way, I don't agree with that in principle or in reality, quite honestly. Page 4, 8.7, federal and provincial governments agree when they come up with ag recovery in terms of a program. They work together, and that being the governments, the provincial, federal, and in this case, territories, which are not too involved. So the province delivers both the federal, provincial shares of funding to producers. The province processes the application, the province makes the payments, and the province conducts post-payment audits of producers. After participating in the assessment of the event, the creation of the initiative, the federal government reimburses the province for the federal share. And then at 8.1, our audits findings relate only to the department. That would be Ag and Ag-Food Canada, as we did not audit the provincial role. So if we, I just need to understand, if we go back to page, forward to page 6, 8.1, 8.15, 45-day target, that's the assessment period. Is that, am I hearing that that's the area of concern?
Well, the area of concern is that the goal of the Agri Recovery Program is to make timely payments. Okay. And what we found was, in some cases, particularly in smaller payments, that it was taking too long. And The department was not tracking how long it was taking to make the payments, and they weren't analyzing why there would be delays. So that's why we say, you know, the program that has as its primary goal making quick payments is not structured to
So would that be a
analyze
joint responsibility?
There's a provincial responsibility as well as a federal responsibility.
So do we know that there's a connection between the provincial and the federal in terms of that responsibility in this audit, or we just took the one side and we don't know what the province's participation is?
What we looked at was the overall timelines for how long it takes to process a payment under any given program, and we found that in some cases they are able to do it within their stated timeline, and in other cases they're not.
Okay, and I'll come to that. Because the 9-month target period, now this, Mr. Chair, is the time in which the payments are met. So from the time the assessment gets evaluated, which seems to take too long, but once that assessment is made, then the targets are hit pretty much in terms of the payment going out. In fact, I think the 9-month target has reached 84% of the time. Is that correct?
You'd have to refer me to a paragraph before I could confirm.
That's 8.16.
The department met its 9-month target for 84% of initiatives, yes.
Okay. So when, just trying, the program in which you evaluated looks at 3 types: disasters, disease, and drought. And more, look at the 3 disasters, I should say: disease, drought, and excessive moisture. Are the large payments under excessive moisture? Which would, I think, if we go back to the front, talks about flooding.
Yeah, certainly the largest program with the largest payment was under excess moisture, yes.
So was that due to flooding?
I don't know whether in all cases it's due to flooding, but certainly flooding would cause excess moisture.
Because you did actually have conversation with a number of agriculture commodity groups, I guess, and I'm a little familiar with it, and I've not, in all my time here, I've ever heard this come up as an issue. So I just want to then go, because I think if you go back, we will find that the largest one of 150 million, for example, 44,000 excess moisture initiative was delivered in a total of 228 days, while the largest, 150 million, took less than half that time. So we're talking about the wet, which mostly is about really bad weather that takes it beyond what insurance would cover and takes it into a disaster program. I'm wondering what was said in terms of disease and drought, in terms of your assessment of the time. If you're in the agriculture field, actually, and if you have disease and drought, it's actually understandable that the assessment time will be quite a bit longer, because there has to be an evaluation, I believe, with the crop insurance to see what impact that disease may have had on the yield, or what impact that drought may have had on the yield of the crop. So I'm trying to understand the justification that both the province and the federal government are telling you through the commodity organizations that this is excessive, and I'm wondering if there's a reason for that, just based on the comments that I've made.
Well, I think the brief answer is to refer to Exhibit 8.3, which indicates the range of days that it would take to process claims under you know, any specific type of disaster, and it shows the ranges are quite large.
Okay, time's expired. Thanks very much, Mr. Shipley. And now over to Mr. Allen.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Ferguson, you actually am going back to food recall, and I listened with great interest to my colleague, Mr. Woodworth. In your statement, I believe, you talked about under Chapter 4, where one of the things that you said is, while illnesses were contained in the recalls that we examined, I am not confident that the system will always yield similar results. And then you went on to talk about there's weaknesses in the inherent system. So although my colleague might say, well, you looked at some samples, you didn't actually find a lot of illnesses, albeit at XL there was some, not lots, obviously. But the other piece, I guess, to look at under ICS is the additional piece that talked about how, yes, at the senior level, and I think Mr. Affleck said that, at the senior level, they understood ICS. But the folks who would have what we call boots on the ground did not. And so there was this whole piece, it seems to me, in reading this, you can help me with this, hopefully, is this folks who thought they had made decisions before who weren't necessarily going to make the decisions now. No one had actually told them that they weren't making the decisions anymore. And so there was a whole ream of confusion, especially at the XL piece, because this was a major recall. Well, in fact, not a major one. It was the largest meat recall in this country's history. And so with that confusion, sir, is that a program that's actually working effectively when the identification is we got confusion?
Well, again, I think we need to go back to the two aspects. In terms of the 3 large recalls that we examined, the number of illnesses were contained. But when we saw that there was confusion in the decision making, that people who would make decisions in the normal course of events were not making decisions in this case, where there was confusion in the communication between the agency and the companies, and I think in the chapter we specifically identify that there was some confusion in the XL case around the dates that were involved in the recall and the products that were involved in the recall. So when we look at that again, we do say that the illnesses were contained in those 3 incidents, but when you look at some of those things that we saw, they need to be improved in order for people to have confidence that the system will always return that level of success.
And I would certainly concur with you, sir, in the sense that if you don't know what the dates are, if you're recalling a particular product, then you actually may be recalling stuff that doesn't need to be recalled. But that's on the plus safety side of the sense. It's a loss to the producer or the processor. The problem is if you got the wrong date and you're supposed to have recalled the day before with tainted material, it's now out there. And that seems to me a glaring gap when that confusion starts. But I want to get on to Chapter 7. You indicated that with a hard cap, if I can use that term, in the budget, which the government has talked about before in the House, and you've identified, what do you see? You've suggested that perhaps they will be faced with some choices. What do you see those choices having to be if they indeed stay at the same dollar figure that's being proposed, if there's no movement in that budget opening up over the next number of years?
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, the question referred to Chapter 7. I think you're referring to Chapter 3 on
3. Beg your pardon, Mr. Ferguson. You're right.
Yeah.
I got ahead of myself. I want to go there next.
Okay. The types of choices really, I think, are the normal types of choices you would see in any large project, whether it's acquisition of military equipment, acquisition of a building, an information technology project, where there are constraints. There's the amount of money you want to spend, there's what you want to buy, and there's when you want it delivered by. And I think people in the consulting business will usually tell you you've got those 3 constraints and you can have any 2 of them. So that's really what this is about. Is there are budget caps. There's a number of ships they want. There's capability they want in those ships. When you put all of those things together, I think it's a normal part of this type of large project that at some point in time there will have to be considerations made about whether there needs to be more money in the budget, whether it's fewer ships, whether the capability of the ships can be reduced. And we've already seen that within these projects they're faced with having to make considerations in some of those areas.
Sorry, time's expired, Mr. Allen. I know, you can commiserate with Mr. Woodworth. And the last in this rotation be Mr. Albus. You have the floor again, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you to our guests for being here to share your work with us today. I'd like to focus on Chapter 5, and that's preventing illegal entry into Canada. And I actually learned quite a bit from your report, sir. Approximately 98.7 million people, non-Canadians, entering our borders to come visit or to do business every year. That's a tremendous amount of people to control, because we want to make sure that we keep people safe. That's about 90,000 a day, I understand. So can Canadians be confident that the CBSA is stopping those people who pose safety and security threats on the whole from entering the country?
What we did in this audit was we examined certain practices of the agency at the border for preventing illegal entry, and we took samples during a period of time. And we did find that there were instances where the agency would have had enough information to identify certain people at the border as people of concern, but those people, there were still some people who were able to get through. Our samples were small. The number of people we talk about that got through were small, but when you look at the size of the number of people who are actually entering, the level of I guess people who were able to get through that shouldn't have gotten through was high enough in our samples that it is in fact concerning.
And I understand, again, there's many different parts that your report touches upon, everything from lookouts to port runners, etc. But I'd like just to focus a little bit on the information that is provided through the airlines. I noticed that that the agency reported an average 99% rate of compliance by airlines for the 2011-2012 fiscal year in sharing, supplying advanced passenger information. And I think that that's certainly reassuring to me, although we still have that 1% to work on. But just again, sir, to the challenge function that your office operates under, I also noticed in paragraph 5.27 that during the audit period, the agency developed an action plan designed to improve the quality of advanced passenger information and passenger name record data it receives. The plan includes more systematic monitoring, reporting, and sharing of results with airlines. So I'm really glad to see that even during an audit that the management of CBSA decided that they would need to make immediate changes to their behavior. Could you just give an idea for the people at home what the difference is, what the advanced passenger information and passenger name record data, and why that's important for in the agency's work to keep Canadians safe?
I won't go into a lot of detail on it. I think, though, there is one thing that I want to clarify. In paragraph 5.25, it does say that the agency reported an average 99% rate of compliance. But the way they have been measuring that is if the airlines provide even one piece of data, they consider the airlines to be in compliance. We would think that for the airlines to be in compliance, they really should be providing all of the data required. So there's actually more to work on than the 1%.
Sure.
We think the 99% really isn't a good measure of how the airline's compliance. In terms of passenger name record, advanced passenger information, do we have okay, I don't believe we have an actual explanation in the. I'll ask Ms. Loschuk to refer to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The advanced passenger information and the passenger name record are data elements about the person flying, such as who are you, where are you from, what's your nationality, what travel documents do you have, how many bags did you bring on board, what kind of ticket are you flying on. And this information is important because the airlines have scenario-based risk assessment, and by plugging in data about travelers, they're able to look at patterns and get certain hits, perhaps against certain names, that identify them or alert them to risks that they should be looking into further.
Thank you for that, and I think that what the Auditor General said, just again clarifying that the difference between what the agency was reporting on and the improvements that need to happen in those two areas. I certainly am happy that CBSA has recognized that and is working to implement that. Has CBSA taken further actions to comply? Pardon me, has the RCMP also been said that they will work on the recommendations you've presented?
I believe that in all of the recommendations that we've made, the appropriate agencies have said they agree with our recommendations.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Colleagues, that expires the formal round of questioning. It's my understanding that there has been consultation among the leads of the three parties, and there's an agreement that we will begin repeating the list of questioners again to take us up to the conclusion of our meeting. Is there unanimous consent and agreement to proceed in that fashion? I see agreement, therefore we will. Thank you. And so now back over to Mr. Woodworth. You're up again, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll go back on to the question of Chapter 4, if I may, and just maybe start in with the back at the question of investigations. In addition, I think, to wanting a very vigilant food recall investigation system, and in addition to wanting to be assured that illnesses are effectively contained by food recall investigations, I think the public wants to insist that these investigations should be done in a timely way. And so I wonder if you can tell us what your examination revealed about how timely the investigations are in cases where food recall is involved.
We found that investigations by the Food Inspection Agency are done appropriately and are done within the timelines that they've established.
Yeah. In fact, as I understand it, 93% of these investigations are at least commenced within 24 hours of the triggering event. Is that correct?
If you could refer me to a paragraph.
I'm looking at page 11 of your report, paragraph 4.24.
Yes, yep, that's right.
And the same paragraph, if I'm reading it correctly, also indicates that the decision to issue a recall in 83% of those cases was made within 8 days of the initial trigger. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, that's right.
And my impression from reading that paragraph is that you found that to be a suitable and appropriate timeline. Is that correct?
Again, certainly the work they do on the investigations of these issues we found to be appropriate.
Now, the other thing, of course, that the public is concerned about is that people want to be warned if there is a problem. So I'm wondering what your examination revealed about how quickly CFIA issues warnings in relation to food recalls.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that was also an area where they did that quickly. Of the 59 recalls, 28 of them required a public warning, and those warnings were all done within a 24-hour period.
Very good. Excellent news. And I suppose the bottom line here with these recalls is that the public wants to be assured that, in fact, the offending goods are removed in an effective and timely way. Does the CFIA have a means of verifying that, in fact, offending products are removed in the course of a recall?
Yes, Mr. Chair. CFIA does indeed carry out all its effectiveness checks, and this is done with a random sampling plan. We did note, however, in the chapter that 16% of these did not meet their time standards. We followed up with each of these files and found out there were particular reasons for them, but we also note in that paragraph, I believe it's paragraph 35, that the CFIA itself did not know whether it was conducting this. It was only through the course of our audit work that we were able to demonstrate to the agency it was being done.
Very good. Now, I understand that Health Canada has a role to play And am I right that Health Canada has an independent risk assessment capacity that is involved in these food recalls?
Yes, that is correct.
And I have the impression that Health Canada's risk assessments are also, in addition to being independent, are very timely and meet the needs in a more or less prompt or rapid basis. Is that correct?
That is correct. The risk assessment determines the likelihood of harm due to exposure to a hazardous substance, and it's a very important input in issuing a recall, and Health Canada was consistent with international principles and met its 8 hours time frame.
And those international principles actually require a pretty good degree of scientific rigor in that testing, and Health Canada does come up with that scientific rigor. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I guess I want to go back to another point that was raised in earlier questioning about the ICS, the Incident Command System. As I understand it, the Weatherall report made its recommendations in July of 2009, and the department or the CFIA indicated by December of 2011 that those recommendations, including the ICS recommendation, had been completed. Does that accord with your understanding?
Well, the manual was developed in 2004, but wasn't really began to be used until 2008.
Now, I'm speaking about the ICS.
Sorry, Mr. Woodworth. Mr. Woodworth. Sorry, sir. Once again.
Thank you.
Time has worked against you. Now, over to Mr. Harris, and you have the floor again, sir.
Thank you very much, and I'll jump right into it so we can get a little bit more questioning in. Mr. Ferguson, in recent times you've expressed a concern, and I mean we know how important the work that your office does, Public Accounts does, and of course this committee is an important part of reviewing the work so that we can write reports that go back to Parliament and get responses from government and to see some action moving forward. Now recently you've expressed some concerns that the committee is not studying as much of your reports as it used to. And of course, your fall report has just come out. The spring report, which came out in the spring in late April, and to date, this committee has only studied one chapter of it. And there's, to date, no plan to go back and study more chapters of it, and some important chapters like search and rescue. Do you believe this committee should, over the next few months, because we have 5 months before your next report comes out, or 6 months, do you think this committee should go back and look over and study more chapters from the spring report?
Mr. Chair, obviously I guess the work schedule of the committee is up to the committee, but we do the audits, we present the audits to the committee. I think there were a number of important chapters, a number of important audits in the spring report. There are a number of important audits here as well. Certainly we feel it helps to get our message through to the departments as well if there are hearings on the audits. So our preference is that there be hearings on as many chapters as possible, but again, it's up to the committee to decide its work schedule.
Absolutely. And certainly a very good point about how the committee having hearings actually helps to get the information out and get messages to departments about improvements that should be made. It's part of the very important oversight that we provide in support of the exceptional work and world-renowned work that your office does. So I certainly would like to look across to my colleagues, and I hope we can find a way to study some more chapters in the previous. Well, focus on this one. We haven't even focused on the last one yet. And moving forward, we certainly need to have a look at more chapters so that we can actually get some improvements in, for instance, search and rescue. Before the next report comes out in the spring. We've got 6 months. We've got lots of time to get that work done on this report and the last one. Now, going back to and following up on Mr. Albus's comments about The changes at the border. Previously, Mr. Ferguson, you stated that I'm very concerned that our audit found too many examples of border controls not working. This is not the first time we have raised these issues. Border controls are still not working as they should. With better analysis of existing information and better monitoring, many of these issues can be fixed. When was it that you first raised these issues?
I believe we raised some of these issues in our 2007 October report. Since then, we've seen that the agency made some progress in terms of how they manage targets, but in terms of how they manage lookouts, we found that they really hadn't made progress since 2007.
So that's 6 years, and there's still been no progress from CBSA on lookouts?
That was our assessment. Again, they've made progress since then on how they manage the targets, but not the lookouts.
Thank you very much. And that proves my point about why we need to continue to be vigilant about previous AG reports and what's in them so that we can actually see action that's going to make Canadians safer. Now, on to shipbuilding. We're very early in the process, and you state that you're optimistic that the process can go well. However, you stated that with the current money and caps that have been allocated, there's no way for the government to actually be able to build the 15 ships that have been committed to, correct?
What we've said is, based on the evidence we've seen right now that exists, that the departments themselves are indicating that on the surface combatants, for the $26 billion, they will only be able to acquire a lesser number of ships, lesser than 15. We don't know what the exact number would be.
Time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Over to Mr. Carmichael, Vice Chair of the Committee. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ferguson, I'd like to move to Chapter 9 on offshore banking, if we could, and I just have two areas I'd like to address in that. The audit looked at how the Canada Revenue Agency has followed up on a list it received in 2007 of possible Canadian residents with accounts in the Liechtenstein Bank. The audit examined whether the agency adequately conducted compliance actions for those named on the Liechtenstein Bank list and used the intelligence gained to confirm its detection and audit procedures for offshore banking, which seems to be a very positive objective and something that was well achieved. My first question is, your report sheds light on the use of non-prosecution agreements and by the CRA as a means of gathering information and intelligence. You concluded that this was a proper approach. I wonder if you could comment on the approach and on why this particular approach was necessary and why we're better served today because of the intelligence gathered.
What we found was the agency decided to use those agreements as part of the process for managing the list. They felt that by doing that, they would be able to gather information about how some of these, how some offshore tax avoidance schemes are put in place. So they were able to gather information about how some of those schemes are put in place. And they were, from that, they were able to identify that they already have some sources of information themselves that would help them identify where there are some of these schemes. I think, though, it's also important, I just want to make sure it's clear that you know, at the end, when they were doing their list, there were 46 family groups that they could follow up on. For 23 of those, they ended up assessing more taxes, penalties, and interest. But for another 23, there was nothing else that needed to be assessed. So I think that's important to remember that, you know, just because people, you know, may have offshore bank accounts doesn't mean that that they're not declaring income.
Yeah, no, I understand the concept, and I agree with you. So then, for the, was it 23 who you didn't follow or didn't require follow-up, they were in compliance with our tax laws?
Well, there was nothing there certainly that that CRA had to assess in terms of additional taxes.
Right. Thank you. My second question, you concluded that CRA, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you can stop me at any point, the CRA was diligent in its approach with the Liechtenstein lists and bank procedures. In your conclusion, paragraph 9.46, you state, "We concluded that overall the Canada Revenue Agency adequately conducted compliance actions for those named on the Liechtenstein lists. It followed its own procedures to determine which files to audit and how to conduct those audits. Agreements allowed the agency to learn about the structure of these investments, which was in line with the project goals." Further, you go on in paragraph, previously actually, paragraph 9.36, and this is where I wanted to ask you, based on your review of the Liechtenstein project, do you feel that measures that were introduced in Economic Action Plan 2013 will meet the objective of ensuring that we've got greater scrutiny in future of these types of situations?
What we've identified, and we refer to the legislative changes in paragraph 36, is that the agency will now have access to more information so that they can identify some of these schemes more quickly. So that will give them more information. They also have more lists, and the concern that we've raised about that is they'll have all of this information. How are they going to manage, I guess, the increased workload that will come along with more lists, more information, and now more knowledge about how these schemes are put into place? How are they going to manage that moving forward?
So, do I have another bit?
Got about 25 seconds.
So then, just so I understand, in concluding then, the Liechtenstein project gave CRA the template by which they could, in fact, take advantage of these lists, do their research, do their diligence in fact, establishing processes and future methods of doing business and monitoring these types of situations, so that in whatever jurisdiction they enter, they will now have a template in place that will allow them to, or give them the skill set to do the job in monitoring and understanding what's going on in that particular tax jurisdiction.
They managed the Liechtenstein list appropriately. It helped them learn how to deal with this type of situation, but there are still some things they need to tighten up. For example, when we asked the agency whether they were going to continue with the types of agreements we were talking about, the agency told us they were not, but some of the individual people, you know, the assessors and things were telling us that they were going to. So there was a lack of consistency there about whether they were going to continue on with the type of agreements that we were talking about, so they need to tighten those things up.
Okay. Thank you. Over to Monsieur Giguère.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 347, in that paragraph you talk about the shipbuilding strategy and the importance to assess productivity and efficiency. I did my homework and I looked at the prices paid by foreign governments, and it's amazing. A ship worth $100 million, that's a lot for the French and the Italians, but ours are $1.6 billion, $1.8 billion, and that's a huge gap. So systematically, the problem is that we are paying a huge price for our ships, and the only way of controlling the price is to reduce either the quality or the size or the number. So we need standardization in the operational requirements, the subcontracting and so on. So did you find in this shipbuilding strategy a particular department or authority that was making sure that when it comes to the different types of ships, that there is interoperability standardization and some efficiency in the procurement. Now, we've got the surface combat ships, and they have 20-millimeter guns. Another kind that has a 27-millimeter gun. Would it not be possible for somebody to sit down and put this together and standardize? Is there some authority that is working on reducing the price instead of just having to cut the number or the quality of these ships? Well, Mr. Chairman, rather, it's difficult to compare the costs of shipbuilding from one country to another. It's quite different when it comes to what is available in a shipyard, what we're dealing with, as well as the skilled labor and so on. We have a recommendation on productivity, and this leads to greater efficiency.
Of your question, we did not question the policy to build in Canada. That is the policy of the government, and we look to see whether there were measures in place. The measures are still being developed now, but we believe through the recommendation that the measurement of productivity will be able to determine whether or not the ships are affordable. In terms of interoperability.
Ma question est relativement simple.
But my question is actually quite simple. Is there, under this policy which you analyzed, a department that is specifically responsible for controlling and reducing the price of these ships and doing a comparison with other countries, ensuring interoperability, or trying to order these ships together with other countries? I think that this is a question really for the department. We can check into this. One quick question. With respect to emergency services for First Nations, it seems that Aboriginal people always receive second-class service, whether we're talking about housing, environmental services, education, and so on. So nothing seems to work the way it should. Is this something wrong within the public service that causes this?
Chair, in terms of the emergency services for First Nations, again, I think the fundamental problem here was, again, identifying roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible for what? And at the end, what it came down to was the department is in a very much a reactive mode. So, the fundamental here that needs to be fixed is making sure that everybody understands who's responsible for what. The department has agreements in place with some provinces, not with all provinces. The agreements that they have in place with some of the provinces does not cover all of the First Nations in those provinces. So again, it really comes down to defining who's responsible for what.
Okay, sorry, time has expired, and we have enough time to squeeze in a 3-minute round for Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In Mr. Sims's initial comments, he was speaking to effective internal controls, and in the same breath, he mentioned the word shipbuilding procurement, and then he went in a completely different direction. So I'm thinking that might be seen as an insinuation that perhaps the shipbuilding procurement program doesn't have effective internal controls. So to you, Mr. Ferguson, can you speak to the shipbuilding strategy in terms of, does it have appropriate oversight, and is it being well managed?
In the audit, we identified that they have an appropriate governance structure. We identified that they have assessed risks and have considered how to mitigate risks. We didn't get down to a level of detail of looking at internal controls, but we did say they have an appropriate governance structure in place.
And did you evaluate the shipyard selection process, and if so, what comments can you make on that?
We evaluated the selection process. We noted again a number of good practices, the fact that third-party consultants were used, analysis was done, there was a good governance structure in place. They do have a risk analysis as well. We did note one thing that we felt could have been done better, which was putting in place the guarantees, which happened after the selection. But in general, we were satisfied with the selection process.
That's my 3 minutes.
That's
I'll
great.
I'll honor my commitment, Mr. Chair.
You more than did that. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. And with that, we conclude our rounds of questions and comments for today. First off, let me thank Mr. Ferguson, our Auditor General, and all of your staff and colleagues for coming here today. But we never tire of saying how much we respect the office of the Auditor General in Canada and how much Canadians look to you and your office to be their eyes and ears in terms of the transparency and accountability here on the Hill. And we thank you very much for that, sir, and we certainly thank you for your attendance here today. Colleagues, just a reminder before we break that on Monday we'll be having a committee meeting. We have already agreed that we are going to hear 4 of the chapters in this report. There will be 2 selected by the government, and there will be 2 selected by the opposition. If they can't come to an agreement, then it will just break down to 1 for the NDP, 1 for the Liberals. And that's in addition to the 3 chapters that the committee had previously agreed to hold hearings on, one of which was a government choice. The other 2 are opposition choices. There's ample time for those hearings. I hope that we're able to squeeze those in. So please bring your selections on Monday. Be ready to get to work. And we'll start scheduling these hearings. And with that, colleagues, unless there is any intervention, and I see none, this committee now stands adjourned.